Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When the new HOA president declared war on his garage, Robert, a no-nonsense Texas mechanic, thought it was just another neighborly nuisance. He was wrong. One midnight break-in, a fearless ex-military wife, and a viral showdown later, suburbia would never be the same. My name is Robert, and I'm a 41-year-old mechanic living a life I'd call simple, honest, and hands-on. I fix things. That's who I am. From chainsaws and ATVs to lawnmowers and pressure washers, if it has an engine or a blade, chances are I've taken it apart and put it back together better than it was before. My garage is more than just a workspace. It's my sanctuary, my fortress, my happy place where the scent of motor oil and sawdust is more comforting than any candle you could buy at a boutique store. I live in a modest but solid home in a quiet Texas suburb. Not too close to the city, not too far from civilization, just right. We've got oak trees, long driveways, and neighbors who mostly mind their business. That is, until the HOA decided to go full Orwell on us. But I'll get to that in a minute. The crown jewel of my property isn't the house, it's the garage. Detached, brick-built, solid as a bunker. That place is stacked. Power tools, shelves of labeled parts, racks of wrenches and socket sets, not to mention my prized welding station and a custom-built workbench I made myself. I've got chainsaws hanging like art, axes mounted like trophies, and a drawer so full of screwdrivers it could be a medieval weapon rack if you squinted hard enough. Everything is clean, organized, and ready to go when a neighbor needs help or I get a weekend project itch. And, of course, there's Lindsay, my wife. God bless her. She's a former Army MP with enough edge to make a diamond blush, sharp-tongued, sharp-eyed, and the kind of woman you never want to sneak up on. She loves me, she loves our life, and she really loves weapons, not in a creepy doomsday prepper way, but more like enthusiast with a side of chaos. You don't argue with a woman who sharpens her own knives while humming old war songs. Until recently, life was good, quiet, predictable. I fixed engines, Lindsay read thrillers, and occasionally practiced takedown drills on our poor scarecrow in the backyard. Then the HOA decided to elect a new president, a woman named Karen Bradshaw. That's when the circus rolled into town. It started with a letter, not a conversation, not a knock on the door, just a smug, overpriced envelope with the Maple Ridge HOA logo stamped on the corner like it was the seal of the president. I pulled it out of the mailbox on a Monday morning, still in my flannel pajama pants, coffee in one hand, and mail in the other. At first, I thought it was junk, maybe another newsletter about block parties or grass height guidelines. I wish I'd been right. Inside was a neatly typed warning addressed to the resident at 4812 Briar Hill Drive. No Dear Robert, no neighborly tone, just legal-sounding garbage and an itemized list of so-called violations that read more like a fantasy novel than a real complaint. According to the HOA, my garage contained items that could be interpreted as dangerous weapons. They referenced multiple resident complaints about visible threatening tools, including but not limited to axes, chainsaws, machetes, long-handled blades, and industrial welding equipment. The cherry on top, a threat of daily fines and potential HOA intervention if the situation wasn't resolved within 10 business days. I laughed at first, actually laughed. Then I read it again, slower, and the absurdity started to feel less funny and more insulting. These weren't weapons, they were tools. I'm a mechanic. This is what I do. That welding rig they flagged as concerning? It's OSHA certified and cleaner than most people's kitchens. The axes, mounted on the wall like decor. And the chainsaws, all of them drained and unplugged, tucked safely in their mounts. There's nothing illegal about owning tools. Hell, in Texas, it's practically a birthright. But this wasn't just about tools. It was about control, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Bradshaw, the newly elected queen of the HOA, the same Karen who stopped me in the street a week earlier to ask if I'd considered covering the windows of the garage so children wouldn't be frightened by the sight of blades. I'd smiled, told her I'd consider it, and went on with my life. Apparently, that wasn't good enough. A few days later, a second letter arrived. This time, it was more aggressive. It cited additional bylaws, claimed unsecured hazardous objects were visible from the road, lies, every one of them, and said the HOA reserves the right to coordinate removal with neighborhood safety enforcement if compliance is not met. Now they were threatening to come onto my property, to take my tools, to decide what's safe based on Karen's paranoia and a few nosy neighbors who probably couldn't tell a screwdriver from a bayonet. I drafted a response, clear, direct, and backed with a copy of my deed, stating that my property predates the HOA's formation by 15 years. I wasn't part of their kingdom. Their bylaws didn't apply to me. I hand-delivered it to the HOA mailbox and went back to replacing the carburetor on an old weed whacker, but something in my gut told me that this wouldn't be the end of it. Karen didn't strike me as the type to accept no for an answer. About a week after that second letter, I got a call from an old client up in Amarillo, someone with a busted generator and a whole fleet of lawn tractors that needed fixing before the weekend. Good money, decent folks, and I'd be back in a couple of days. No big deal. Lindsay would be home, and honestly, she could handle just about anything that came our way. Hell, there were times I felt safer leaving the property when she was the only one guarding it. Before heading out, I checked the garage locks, double-checked the camera feeds on the app, and gave Lindsay the rundown in case any more HOA nonsense showed up. She waved me off with a grin and a sarcastic salute, already halfway through polishing the blade of her favorite utility knife. "Let 'em try," she said, tossing me a wink. I've been bored. It was late Thursday night when things went sideways. From what Lindsay later told me, it started with the soft click of the garage lock being tampered with, just past 2:30 in the morning. Most people wouldn't hear it. Lindsay did. She always sleeps light, especially when I'm gone. Years in the military will do that to you. She slipped out of bed without a sound, checked the hallway, and confirmed what the security feed was already showing her on her phone. Two shadowy figures dressed in black, creeping toward the garage like they were casing a bank. No badges, no warning, just gloves, flashlights, and duffel bags. HOA security, apparently, Karen's personal rent-a-cops, probably thought we were out of town, or that Lindsay wouldn't be much of a problem. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By the time the lock gave and they stepped inside, Lindsay was already slipping into her boots. She didn't go for the real steal. She's smart like that, but she sure as hell geared up. Flashbang grade flashlight, heavy-duty taser, pepper spray, and her custom leather sheath knife. Enough to send a clear message without doing anything fatal. She tucked a GoPro on her shoulder strap and stepped out into the cool night air like it was a training op. One of the goons was already unhooking my favorite chainsaw from the wall, my limited edition style with the polished handle and tuned carb. The other was loading tools into a duffel, wrenches, pliers, a torque set I'd gotten for my birthday. Lindsay watched them for a few seconds, letting them dig their own graves, and then flipped the flashlight on full blast. They froze like raccoons caught in a spotlight. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she said, voice flat, calm, and terrifying. The taller guy panicked immediately, dropped the chainsaw, and held up his hands. The shorter one tried to run, tripping over an extension cord and crashing into a stack of tires. Lindsay advanced like a panther, flashlight in one hand, taser in the other, barking commands that made both of them drop to the floor before they realized they were even scared. In less than a minute, she had zip ties on their wrists and her foot on the duffel bag, now bulging with half my garage inventory. "I suggest you stay very, very still," she told them, casually checking the garage door lock behind her. "Robert really likes these tools. I don't think he'd appreciate you stealing them." The taller guy whimpered. The shorter one might have peed himself. Lindsay pulled up the garage stool, sat down like a queen overseeing prisoners of war, and waited for sunrise. By the time I pulled into the driveway around 7 a.m., I knew something was off. There were two police cruisers parked outside, lights spinning lazily in the morning haze, and a small crowd of neighbors standing at a distance, craning their necks toward my garage like they were waiting for a verdict. I hit the brakes halfway up the drive and got out slowly, heart thumping, not out of fear, but out of confusion. I hadn't been gone 2 days. What the hell had happened? Then I saw her, Lindsay, sitting calm as a lake on my garage stool, legs crossed, cup of coffee in one hand, and her shotgun resting casually across her lap like it was part of the morning routine. To her left was the infamous duffel bag, unzipped and spilling tools. To her right, two grown men in black tactical polos were seated on the concrete with their wrists zip-tied behind their backs, looking like kids caught shoplifting from a military surplus store. One of them was visibly shaking. The other had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who just reevaluated every decision he'd made in the past 48 hours. Lindsay looked up, smiled, and said, "Morning, babe. You're early. Want some coffee?" I didn't answer at first. I just stared. The smell of metal and sweat hung in the air. The garage light was still on, and one of the fluorescent tubes was flickering. It gave the whole scene a strange, almost theatrical effect, like we were in Act 3 of a crime drama. I walked closer, taking in the absurdity of it all. "What the hell happened?" She took a sip, nodded toward the trembling duo on the floor. "Karen's goons. Broke in around 2:30. Thought they'd help themselves to your dangerous items." I suggested otherwise. One of the officers approached me. Young guy, early 30s, looking equal parts impressed and exasperated. "You Robert Adams." "That's me." "Your wife detained these two around 2:45 this morning. Security detail hired by the HOA claimed they were sent to confiscate hazardous materials under the direction of one Karen Bradshaw." I blinked. "Hazardous materials?" "Yes, sir. Tools, chainsaws, a welding helmet. One of them was holding a torque wrench when she lit them up with the flashlight." I rubbed my face. This couldn't be real. But it was. The evidence was right there in the form of bruised egos, scattered socket sets, and the unmistakable click of Lindsay's coffee mug against her shotgun stock. That's when we heard screeching tires. A silver Lexus tore up the street and came to a halt half on my lawn. Karen Bradshaw climbed out in pajama pants, a designer bathrobe, and enough fury to power a wind farm. She stormed up to the police, gesturing wildly at the garage. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. I authorized this. We were acting in the interest of community safety. That man's garage is a death trap." Everyone stared. She pointed at Lindsay. "And she's unhinged. She's threatening people with weapons." Lindsay didn't move. She just raised an eyebrow and tapped the GoPro on her shoulder. "I have the entire break-in recorded, including your boys here saying you sent them." Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked at the officers. "We're the HOA. We have authority." One of the cops, older, gruffer, stepped forward. "Ma'am, this isn't a matter of HOA authority. This is criminal trespass, attempted burglary, and unauthorized entry. You don't get to deputize civilians to conduct break-ins." "But it was for safety." He crossed his arms. "You sent unlicensed men to invade private property at 2 in the morning. That's not safety. That's a felony." As Karen sputtered, trying to salvage her shredded dignity, the officers started cuffing the two intruders and bagging the tools as evidence. Lindsay stood and stretched, shotgun still in hand, her expression cool and casual, like she'd just finished pruning the roses. I looked at the mess, then at her. She just shrugged. "I told you I'd keep an eye on things." Karen was still flailing her arms and raising her voice like it gave her authority, oblivious to how completely she'd just sunk her own ship. The officers weren't biting. One was on his radio, probably calling for transport, while the other stood between her and Lindsay. Wise move, really. Karen kept repeating the same thing like it was a magical phrase. "Community safety. We have bylaws. We have the right." "No, Karen, no you don't." The older officer, the one with the weathered face that said he'd dealt with enough suburban drama to last a lifetime, finally stepped in front of her, arms crossed, expression neutral. "Let me explain something very clearly, Ms. Bradshaw. The HOA has no legal authority to conduct searches or seizures. You are not law enforcement. Your little security team broke into private property without a warrant in the middle of the night. That's breaking and entering. That's attempted burglary. That's criminal conspiracy if you sent them." Karen blinked like she'd just heard a foreign language. "But the tools, the chainsaws. People said it looked like a weapon cache. I was acting on behalf of the neighborhood. You were committing a felony," the officer cut in. "And now we need you to come with us for further questioning." Karen gasped like someone had slapped her. "You're arresting me. Me. I'm the HOA president." I couldn't help myself. I coughed into my hand, just loud enough for the word dictator to slip through. Lindsay smirked without looking up. Karen spun on me like a top. This is your fault. You brought this on yourself, Robert. You and your unstable wife. turning your garage into a weaponized storage bunker. I fix engines, I said flatly. You broke into my garage and tried to steal my Torca wrenches. She was unraveling fast. Her voice kept rising in pitch, and her carefully maintained image, a robe-clad woman of authority, was cracking like cheap porcelain. It's a safety issue. What if a child wandered in there? What if someone got hurt? The younger officer chimed in, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. So your solution was to send two guys at 2:30 in the morning to commit a crime? That's how you enforce neighborhood safety now. One of the detained security guards, still sitting on the concrete with his wrists zip-tied behind his back, groaned. She said the guy was a hoarder with explosives. Karen spun around. I never said explosives. You kinda did. The other one mumbled. Lindsay reached into the duffel and held up my welding mask. They tried to walk out with this. What were they going to do? Defend themselves against the sun? I looked at the cops. Do I need to press charges, or are we already rolling on that? Oh, we're rolling, the older officer said. You'll still want to file a formal statement, but this is enough for probable cause. The camera footage, their confessions, her involvement. And the bag of loot, Lindsay added, giving the duffel a little nudge with her boot. Karen had reached full meltdown by now. Her voice cracked. She turned back to the crowd of neighbors watching from a safe distance near the sidewalk. You all see this, right? They're dangerous. They're armed. That woman is crazy. She threatened my security detail. There was a beat of silence. Then a neighbor, Jim from across the street, stepped forward with his phone held high. Actually, he said, I think everyone here already saw what happened. He hit play. The video was already spreading. Lindsay's GoPro footage synced through our home server had backed up instantly. The moment she turned the flashlight on the intruders, barked her orders, zip-tied the would-be burglars, and sat down like she owned the place. It was all there. The icing on the cake. That now iconic line, crystal clear on video. Down on the ground, Karen's mutts. I've got a stun gun. And a free evening. A laugh rippled through the onlookers. Even one of the officers couldn't hide his grin. Karen turned ghost white. You're all insane, she whispered. Nope, I said. We just believe in the Constitution and locks. A few minutes later, they read Karen her rights. She went stiff as a board, then began muttering about lawsuits, calling her lawyer, and getting the board involved. But it was too late. The cops had her. The evidence had her. Hell, even her own rent-a-cops had turned on her. As they led her to the cruiser, her bathrobe flapping in the wind, I turned to Lindsay. She handed me her coffee cup. Still warm, she said. I figured you'd need it. I took a sip and looked around at the mess. The tools, the ruined lock, the scattered pride of Karen Bradshaw. This wasn't just a win. It was a complete combustion of everything she thought she controlled. And it was just the beginning. By the end of that day, our street had turned into a quiet revolution. Word spread faster than a brush fire in a dry canyon. Within hours, the HOA's official email inbox was flooded with complaints, not against us, but against Karen. Dozens of neighbors, some of whom I'd barely spoken to beyond a wave or nod, started showing up in person, shaking my hand or bringing over casseroles like we'd survived a tornado. You folks did what we were all too scared to, one guy told me. She's been on a power trip since the day she moved in. Apparently, Lindsay's viral moment had struck a chord. The GoPro footage ended up on the neighborhood Facebook group, Maple Ridge Watchdogs, and the comment section lit up like the 4th of July. People were quoting her line like it was from a Tarantino movie. Someone even made a meme of her holding up the flashlight with bold letters that read, Neighborhood Safety Texas Edition. My garage had never been so famous, but Karen wasn't done. Not yet. 2 days after her arrest, while the HOA board was still scrambling to recover from the fallout, every mailbox on our street received another official-looking letter. I opened ours at breakfast, half choking on my toast as I read the headline. Important community notice. Ongoing threat from dangerous residents. The letter painted me as an unstable tool hoarder and described Lindsay as a militarized individual with extreme tendencies. It claimed our home was a volatile site and that we had compromised the peaceful fabric of Maple Ridge. It was signed, still, somehow, by Karen Bradshaw. My first thought, she wrote this before they hauled her off and had someone mail it out. My second thought, oh, this just made things worse, because by the afternoon, that same letter was being torn apart in comment threads, quoted by angry neighbors who'd finally had enough. One woman wrote, "Karen tried to weaponize the HOA, and now she's trying to start a witch hunt. Enough is enough." The HOA board couldn't ignore it anymore. They called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, and to their credit, they opened it to all residents, not just voting members. Lindsay and I showed up fashionably late, half expecting pitchforks. Instead, we got applause. I'm not exaggerating. The board tried to explain, tried to say Karen had acted without official authorization, but no one was buying it. Every voice in the room had a story. Fines for wind chimes, threats over mailbox colors, warnings about Halloween decorations. Karen had ruled by fear, and now that fear was gone. A vote was held on the spot. Karen was officially removed from the board. Her little safety initiative was dissolved. The HOA president, visibly sweating, stood up and publicly apologized to us in front of the entire room. "We regret what happened to Mr. and Mrs. Adams. This board failed to act sooner, and we will be reviewing our own oversight procedures moving forward." Translation: We don't want to get sued. Lindsay leaned over and whispered, "Should have brought popcorn." A week after the dust settled, I bolted a new sign to the front of my garage. Bright aluminum, laser-etched. Couldn't miss it, even if you were speeding by. Warning: property protected by wife, weapons, and righteous fury. No Karens allowed. It was more than a joke. It was a message, a boundary, literally and figuratively. The neighbors loved it. People came by just to take pictures with it. One guy brought his teenage son over and said, "This is how you protect what's yours, son, with tools, cameras, and a wife who can bench press a liar." Lindsay took the attention in stride. She wasn't one to brag, but I caught her watching that viral clip a few times when she thought I wasn't looking, chuckling to herself. She even got a handwritten thank you note from someone on the board, an older woman who'd apparently been fined $200 last year for planting sunflowers too close to the curb. We got invited to more block parties in that 1 week than in the entire 5 years we'd lived here. Lindsay joked that we'd become the neighborhood's unofficial security force. "Only difference is," she said, "we actually wait for people to break the law before we tie them up." Karen, as far as I heard, skipped town, moved in with her sister in Nevada, according to gossip. She tried to sue the HOA for wrongful termination, but it fizzled out fast. No one was interested in defending a woman who tried to confiscate a socket wrench like it was a bomb. As for me, I went back to what I do best, fixing things. I tuned engines, sharpened blades, cleaned carburetors. The garage felt even more like home now. Not because anything changed, but because it had been tested and held. Sometimes I still think about that night, about Lindsay standing calm and fierce in the middle of my workshop, flashlight in one hand, taser in the other, like some mythical defender of hardware stores and marital property rights. And every time I do, I smile. People talk a lot about home security, alarms, cameras, fences. But me, I've got Lindsay. And that, my friend, is more than enough.